Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It's Thursday, March 21st. 2024, time for another show, time for another NCAA Division I men's basketball tournament. And then, of course, it's also the women's tournament happening today. And they don't give enough attention to that. And usually we're able to say that the UConn women are coming in to dominate, and the men occasionally nowhere to be seen. But this time it looks like the men's team is coming in as the one, I guess maybe even the number one overall seed, which really ruins chances of my participating in my usual basketball, let's say, consultation with a group of like-minded individuals, because it's Connecticut based. And any year when there's a really serious chance, and there's very frequently a serious chance that the UConn Huskies will run away with it, is a perilous one. If you're in a pool with a bunch of people from Connecticut, everybody's going to have picked Connecticut. So you either go the other way in the hopes that there's some sort of an upset and you're the only one left standing, or you got to bank on early rounds lifting you above the rest of the people who are also going to pick Connecticut. So I don't know. I may just relieve myself of the burden. I haven't finished anything, and I've done it in the years past where I finished the show and I have literally 1 hour to then make the picks and submit them online, so that I make it in time for the like-minded folks who just want to compare notes with one another can accept my notes into their convocation. But I might have to skip it this year. I don't know. Anyway, it's just too bad. And then this way I can sort of just watch disinterested from the note comparing side with everybody else and enjoy the James Madison University Dukes making their run at it. The things are getting out of hand with the seeding on these things too, by the way. Anyway, lots of technical problems I'm finding with the basketball note comparing game, and so maybe it's time to get out of it anyway. All right, well, Justice claims I actually sound a little better, so that's good news. I've been working on it, and this thing's still lingering, shifting into a different gear, but hanging on nonetheless. Anyway, we hope it'll clear up, and I'll sound back to normal next week. Lots to catch up on. Of course, there's always the raft of stories waiting in the wings. Hints from Justice about what's on his mind. His head is in the courtroom these days, and I'm not even certain I have the latest on hand on all of these things. And it's always a good sign, well, / bad sign, depending on what your perspective is, when Justice hints at a story and I say, oh, I don't know what the hell, I don't know what the hell he's talking about this one. So, this one about Jonathan Turley. Maybe give me another note there. Justice, but Greg knows what's going on, so maybe it's time to bring him on and let him fill me in on. He can tell me what's Justice whispering in my ear here. I made a run at one trying to make basketball picks last night, but I was just out of gas. But also had the board meeting last night for Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters, nationwide something. All right. So I don't know. It wasn't that. It's the temple. We had to have our board meeting, and so that eats up an awful lot of the evening, and that means time that I'm usually spending collecting ideas for the next day kind of out the window. But luckily, we have Greg, and Greg has the latest on the courts. Now I have my hint from Justice about what's going on with Turley. You never know with this guy, but the hint was that Turley resurrected a dead judge, or a judge who had been dead for 3 years, just in time for Easter. So we'll go and figure out what that's about. And in the meantime, Greg Dworkin has decoded the rest of the happenings in the courtrooms. Good thing, too, because, listening to me Google is not always the best radio. Good morning, Greg. How are you?
Hey, good morning.
In
so
Connecticut.
Is this Jonathan Turley talking about Trump paying the fine he owes?
I'm scanning it here. Let's see.
Posting his bond?
I don't know.
mean, he called it an existential moment for the New York legal system because if Trump is made to actually follow the law like everybody else, and there have been bigger bonds that have been asked for by the courts. This is not the largest.
Oh, that will disappoint Trump. Actually, there was a 50-50 chance he would go back and say, "No, I want the bond to be larger.
Right.
I should be the largest bond ever."
So
Absolutely.
if he can't post the money, Turley says it's bad for Trump, but it's also bad for the legal system.
Of course, why not?
Because why? Because what the court did was outrageous. And Turley, like many of the reporters who don't really understand this, Armando does, he actually practices civil law in New York, thinks that the size of the bond was based on thinking how rich Trump was. Therefore, it was punitive.
I see.
It's not like when Alex Jones defamed the Sandy Hook families and the size of the settlement was based on how much of an a-hole he was. That's not what this is. It's simply a matter of New York law, and the amount of money is based on the size of the money in the suit.
Yes, this is a disgorgement of illegally gained profit.
Right.
So money he got
you can't say, well, how can you ask
loans
for this much money? Well, the answer is because he's this much of a crook. That's why.
Mathematics, right. I asked for a loan of this amount at this rate, and I wasn't entitled to it, but I got the loan through fraud. How much money did that save me? That much goes in the pot.
And so all the right-wing billionaires like Shark Tank co-star Kevin O'Leary saying, well, I won't invest in New York anymore.
Oh, did they pin that one on him? Okay.
Which is stupid.
Yeah, I mean, good luck.
Of course you will. If there's money to be made, then you'll invest in New York. And that's why a whole lot of people are in New York City doing business. That's why Trump likes to do business.
Kind of a business capital of the world. One of many, let's say, but it's certainly the one that they flock to. None of them are giving up penthouse apartments or Wall Street perches. So I
So
doubt
that's the uninteresting thing that came out of this.
All right.
It's a big story that Trump doesn't have the money. And the reason he doesn't have the money is he lied about how rich he is. Okay?
Yes.
And the reason that lying about how rich he is a big deal is because the supporters think he's really rich and he's lying to them.
Yeah. Well,
so the fact that he can't come up with the money proves the lie. And, that's going to have political implications.
Okay. Yeah, well, it should. I mean, then again, it might not because they don't care about anything.
Well, when you say they don't care about anything, a third of the Republican Party is in that bucket.
Okay.
But there's 2/3 otherwise. There's that 30% that didn't vote for Trump. There's those who have, a little bit of Trump skepticism, which is going to grow as time goes on. In the meantime.
Well, those weirdos are the ones I mean. You weirdos.
Yeah, I was in
doesn't matter.
Twitter conversation with Lisa Rubin and Katie Fang, people who actually know what they're talking about when they talk about this. And, Katie Fang noted yesterday, says Lisa Rubin, prior mortgages on Trump properties don't prevent Tish James from trying to collect on them. She doesn't want them.
Oh, yeah.
Because they're not worth much.
Because all the money is owed to someone else, and they're supposed to get paid. Yeah, she could liquidate that stuff.
What they should do is just take his damn plane, make him fly commercial.
Yeah, and then everybody would know how much he smells, by the way.
Yeah, and they'd
you
report
would be
on it,
very
too.
well aware. Yeah, no hiding that anymore.
Anyway, there's a company called Axos, not to be confused with Axios, the media company.
Or Axe body spray.
Axos Bank.
Okay.
Both loans to Trump Tower's commercial portion and the Doral course are listed by Trump as over $50 million. Actually, according to Washington Post, that's ACKTUALL. Well, actually.
Oh, I see.
These loans are for $100 million and $125 million, respectively.
Oh. And he understands.
So, in other words, he's over-leveraged and underfunded, is the point I'm trying to make here.
Okay.
So that's why he doesn't have money.
Okay. Then sounding like it's maybe bad.
Right. So while Trump complains, says Lisa Rubin, that the New York Attorney General is desperate to sell off his empire.
Yeah, I'm right behind her on that one.
Tish James has no interest in assuming the risk of executing a defendant's illiquid asset. Her office said as much in its reply brief yesterday. In fact, their position is if Trump and his businesses can't obtain or provide an undertaking, they should consent to have the real estate assets held by the Supreme Court to satisfy the judgment. So just attach his properties. Don't sell them.
Okay.
They don't want a fire sale. So
It's
they're not going to force
a
sale of assets. He's just over-leveraged, underfunded, and exposed. And now he's panicking, says Katie Fang, because he's too much of a credit risk for a legitimate source to be willing to underwrite the bond, which is why none of his billionaire friends are willing to loan him the money.
Yeah,
other than
Mike
Lindell, who doesn't have any money.
He
Most of Trump's rich friends aren't as stupid as he is, or as Lindell. In
Yeah.
other words, they're not going to bankrupt their entire fortune in order to save him.
And they're trying. I understand that essentially they were using the Sean Hannity's TV show as a kind of a deal brokerage, just bringing on other billionaires and basically asking them, well, would you lend him money?
Sean Hannity's GoFundMe. Right.
Yeah, that's crazy. All right. Well, no one willing to do that. Everyone knows it's a bad risk and he'll steal that money or waste it or lose it in court. And they're just not interested. What do you know?
Now, this is an odd story in the Washington Post, and I don't fully understand it.
All right. I will make it worse.
Bankruptcy is one way out of Trump's financial jam. He doesn't want to take it. People close to the presumptive 2024 Republican nominee say he's not considering bankruptcy, even though it could ease his immediate cash crunch. But I'm not sure it would. You can't discharge your obligations through bankruptcy here.
Okay. That's probably true.
He doesn't have many options. But Trump is not considering that approach, the story says, partially out of concern that it could damage his campaign to recapture the White House. Well, also partially out of concern that it wouldn't work much.
Yeah, well, those are two pretty good concerns. I mean, except I hope he doesn't win the White House, but yeah.
What he thinks is that if he files bankruptcy, it delays things. Because we saw that with Alex Jones.
And it might.
You know, Alex Jones says, oh, you say I'm in hock to these Sandy Hook families for a lot of money. Well, I'm bankrupt.
Yeah.
Well, no, you're not. Yeah.
Well, then they comb through everything you've got.
Courts. That'll take another 6 months.
I guess so. And it could delay things in terms of, I don't know, the ultimate outcome, but it's a terrible 6 months in which, everything you're spending money on is printed in the newspaper.
And every story starts with the bankrupt Donald Trump was at a rally today complaining about the legal system that bankrupted him.
Yeah, and then there'll be a note about, and the campaign spent X $1,000 on water, and he's says he's bankrupt. So what?
And the other part is, you may not have to pay until it's worked out, but interest keeps accruing.
Yeah. Well, he may plan to die before he pays.
Right. But again, it's bankruptcy is a useful maneuver when nobody's looking.
Yeah.
But when you're running in a campaign and you make that, I have two central things I want to tell people why they should vote for me. One, January 6th, everybody's being treated unfairly. It was a walk in the park, and you guys got it all wrong. And on the other hand, I'm bankrupt. I'm a stable genius, a bankrupt stable genius.
It's a good look.
It's so stably genius-ish.
Yeah.
That I made January 6th the centerpiece of my campaign because it's so popular.
Like we said,
by the way,
you can always make the fans.
I also want an abortion ban, and I want to cut Social Security and Medicaid.
Yeah.
And the Republicans do too, because the Republican conference just said so. So I'm a stable genius who's really smart.
Okay.
I don't. You know what? He doesn't really have a good campaign.
No, the
guy's broke. He's not running on
choices.
anything popular. And his own personal popularity is there for now. Most of the political world reads how popular he is and how well he's doing. It's interesting, like 12 national polls over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah.
5 out of 6 of the older ones show Trump leading slightly. 5 out of 6 of the newer ones show Biden leading slightly. It's basically tied. New poll out of Michigan saying it's basically tied. It's March. These polls don't mean anything other than setting narrative. My point is, the narrative isn't that Biden's doomed and Trump's bound to win. If anything, the opposite. You look at the polls and say, for now, they're tied, as is often the case in March before people really get serious about it. But Trump doesn't have any money. He is in danger of forcing the issue, and he might have to declare bankruptcy, which would look terrible for him. And even MAGA can't argue that, no, it's really good for him because you're talking about.
I don't know.
It's terrible for him.
Well, it's not a good argument. It gets to
his entire image, his entire persona, who he is. And in fact, may have psychological ramifications because he's already losing it. And this isn't going to help because every single day he's bankrupt.
Yeah. I imagine they play him as the martyr in some way, but it's not where you want to be.
At the end of the day, when he goes to bed and turns out the lights, he's bankrupt.
Yeah. Or that people say lights out to him and he has no control over whether the lights are on again or the doors slide shut.
Right. Meanwhile,
depends where you are.
People are still talking about the bloodbath. Words and controversy. Bill Scher has a very nice take on it in Washington Monthly.
Okay.
He said, let's just forget about these stupid debates over Trump semantics.
Done.
It doesn't matter. Here's what matters.
Oh.
Okay.
So
are we better off than we were 4 years ago? Yes. The cities aren't burning. Our capital isn't under siege.
Our cities weren't burning. All right.
This narrative frame. Well, yes, but if you go by Trump's claim,
if we go by Trump's
we're better
claim,
off than we were 4 years ago. This narrative frame connects Trump's rhetoric to his presidency without burdening Trump's critics to prove a remark was intended to provoke violence. It doesn't matter what he meant. What matters is what he did. And what he did, still doing with this hostages stuff, vowing to pardon them.
Yes, he is doing that.
There he goes again, critics can say, turning Americans against each other with irresponsible rhetoric. And we know how this ends. And that's all you have to say. And it doesn't really matter whether he was talking about the auto industry. That's a stupid sidebar that nobody cares about. What people care about is that there was an insurrection, there was violence, and he keeps using violent rhetoric. And it's the same person, and he knows how it ends, and he's doing it anyway, and that's what you need to know.
Okay. Speaking of insurrection, the quote that you had attributed to one of the billionaires who said, I'm not lending him any money. All I saw yesterday was that there was a quote like that was unattributed. But there were a couple of anonymous quotes in the paper about people not coming to his assistance, but making some sort of reference to insurrection that made it sound like, is Trump giving anonymous quotes on his own behalf again to the New York Post? Did that ring a bell for you?
John Barron?
Yeah, I mean, it's what it sounded like. Is they said something like where people were saying, "Oh, well, I'll never do business in New York again." And there was an unattributed quote that went something along the lines of, "There's going to be, I don't know what, fallout or a retribution of some kind. There's going to be consequences from this. Not an insurrection, something, and people are going to move their money out. But that little, not an insurrection. Like, you were thinking that we thought there was going to be an insurrection launched in New York City, and it was the sort of thing that only Donald Trump's addled brain would stick in the middle of a sentence like that.
You have to remember when Trump was indicted, and he had to show up in court in New York City.
I remember when he was indicted. It's now.
And he said there's going to be these huge counter protests, and everybody's going to come out. With like 14 people there, 13 of whom were reporters.
That's true. He did claim that there would be massive, movement in the streets to protest the unfairness of it all, and that's not true.
No, it isn't true. So the environment,
let me see if I can find this
that Trump is running is certainly not favorable for him, and that's why, not just because you take March polls with a grain of salt, but because if you look in the environment, who's got the money, who's got the popular programs, et cetera, et cetera. And Trump is in a big hole.
Okay.
Now, here's a difference.
Well, it has to be.
And by the way, for administrative purposes, I guess I should notify you. I don't know that I'm going to last past the break, but I'll try.
Okay. But administratively noted.
But I'll try to finish.
I'll use AI to complete it for you. It'll sound like you.
For change, that guy sounds intelligent.
You could talk about all that. My 29 fingers.
So, the New York Times has this really interesting story.
All right.
Okay.
I dare.
And it's about California, Gavin Newsom, and the homeless.
Oh, boy. Oh.
But
homeless
it's
are big
also
these days.
about elections and who shows up. Once a sure thing, Newsom's homelessness measure barely passes. The measure known as Prop 1, which includes $6.38 billion for treatment, that is to say mental and drug treatment for the chronically homeless, as well as housing, was a top priority for Governor Newsom to reduce homelessness in the state. It was supposed to pass easily. It passed, but narrowly.
Okay.
So, as Rachel Maddow might say, why is that? Why is that? Why?
Yes.
Why is that? Why? How did it happen? Well, partly it's because there's a difference between polling and those who show up to vote.
All right.
And this is by mail, but only about a third of eligible voters took part in this election in California recently, which takes forever to count. But still, the volume of people showing up wasn't that great.
Okay.
Adam Schiff wanted a ultimate contest because this was a jungle primary, meaning top two get picked no matter which party. Adam Schiff wanted to run against Steve Garvey, hapless father of California Steve Garvey. Garvey's accused of fathering a whole bunch of kids to sundry people. That's why he's known as the father of California.
Wow.
So Schiff wanted to run against him.
Father of the year, yes.
Father of the year.
Every year.
He put a lot of money into running against conservative Steve Garvey. So in this election where a lot of people don't show up, about a third of the voters were Republicans voting for Garvey. More conservative than what you'd usually expect when the number of people who show up in something like this is closer to like 25% Republicans.
Yeah.
The point is you had an electorate which was much more conservative and more Republican than usual. And so they didn't vote for Proposition 1 because it costs money, and Republicans don't like spending money on anything.
Okay.
Especially if they're from not the city. And these problems are mostly in San Francisco and L.A. and other cities.
Okay.
So what you do is by pushing Garvey, you actually skew the electorate a little bit. You make it more conservative, and then your liberal proposition has more conservatives voting against it than you planned, and it barely passes. But it still passed. And that's really the bottom line.
Okay.
So the point is, the difference between what the polls say and what the voters say has a lot to do with who shows up. And if you poll California, but only a third of people show up, and those that do are more conservative than you were counting on, you're going to get a different result than the polls say.
Okay. Sure.
Republicans are counting on that in November. I don't think that's what's going to happen.
Okay. All right.
November is a completely different electorate. We hear that all the time saying, well, you can't read too much into primary stuff because it's not the same like unless the conservatives do much better than you thought they would. Then you have to read everything into it. Well, here's a case where, no, you actually don't.
Okay.
Right? Conservatives did do better than they thought.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean anything from trying to figure out what it means in November.
All right.
So be consistent. If you think it doesn't mean anything,
no way.
It doesn't mean anything even when conservatives do better than you thought. And if you think it means something, then try to figure out exactly what it is that it means. In this case, I think that the primaries do mean stuff. I think that 30%, 25%, 22%, whatever the number is in any given state or county, especially the suburban counties, Republicans are voting against Trump. I think it means something. It's not the exact number we'll see in the fall, but I think it means something. And I think that this means something too. California has some budget issues, and there are people who don't want to spend a whole lot of money if they don't have to, but there were enough that recognize that this was a problem that you have to try to do something about, and so good for them.
Okay. Yeah, good. I think.
Yep.
Okay. Well, California and budget things, man. I don't know. It's weird.
I'm not from California. I look at it and I roll my eyes and say, "Oh God, another prop."
Yeah, it's a very weird history that they have with this, and a good reminder.
Is this a 13? Is this a 17? Is this a what?
Who knows?
What the heck?
Right. Well, it's difficult to tell what's happening in California, but it is a good periodic reminder. Well, one way of looking at it is there are more conservative voters in California than there are as often in the entire red states where there are.
There are more conservative voters in California than there are voters in certain states.
Right. Oh, absolutely. There's more. I mean, there's more people in Los Angeles County than there are in certain states. We've been over those issues before. But yeah, California's got, it's a massive population, and it's, been a reliably blue state. Not always, but for a long time. But that's only because there are just X number more blue voters than there are red. They're not voting 80-20 out there.
Anyway, I'll just throw this in before the break because it's coming up imminently.
Oh, yes, it is.
But Democrats are open to a loan strategy for Ukraine aid. Mike Johnson has to finish up his paying for the government, which is almost but not quite done. Mm-hmm. And then he says he'll turn to strategies for Ukraine. If it's called a loan, but not just giving them money, Republicans may buy in as a face-saving measure. That'd be fine, as long as they do it. Democrats are okay with that.
Right. They've winked at loans before, so okay. Well, if it makes it work, that's fine. That's a good thing. It's a long time in coming. Sometimes you just need to give these guys cover for stuff. And they'll show up and legislate. So, all right. Very good. And we'll take our break, and we'll see where we're going from there. I can tell you what Justice was hinting at after this.
Sup, fam? It's your boy Darwin, a.k.a. Darwin_Darko, a.k.a. the most reasonable man in America, a.k.a. KITM's senior black correspondent. You might remember me from such recordings as Spacemen vs. Space Cadets and We Need to Talk About Joe Biden. Today, I want to bring you good news about that thing you've been struggling with. Do you suffer from giving too much of a damn? Do you turn on the series of tubes and find yourself outraged at the particular way some news organization strung some sentences together only to realize, nope, this is not some fictional hellscape? Well, guess what? You no longer have to accept the life of giving too much of a damn. You can do something about it, because even you, yes you, can be a show contributor. Now I know what you're thinking. Hey, Mr. Most Reasonable Man in America, I'm not some professional podcast talking guy. Don't worry about it. Do you have a smartphone or some other electronic recording device? Well, that's all you need. You too can have a segment where you can read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Fair warning though, side effects may include general punditry, having opinions and hot takes, getting stuff off your chest, and hearing your own voice. If your recording lasts longer than 5 to 7 minutes, please consult kagrox@gmail.com. That's KAGROX@gmail.com.
All right, welcome back now. Thank you. I don't know what happened there for a second, but a little max headroom invasion. Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show. We're back. Not sure what I stumbled over there either. Anyway, I wanted to let you know that I have ahead in front of me the story that Justice was hinting about. It's from Raw Story, and I don't know. I'll start by giving you the headline, and then we'll untangle it from there. Did this happen during a seance? It's a quote. A Trump-loving professor, that's Jonathan Turley, slammed, that's a good idea, for dead judge mix-up. Okay, let's see if we can figure out what this is all about. A law professor, that's Turley, who frequently defends Donald Trump, got a swift correction on Wednesday when he asserted that a dead judge had spoken out against ex-Trump attorney Michael Cohen. That's some low-stakes stuff, but okay. U.S. District Judge William Henry Pauley III slammed Michael Cohen today in saying that he has clearly committed perjury. He posted in a Twitter thread. Okay. The court noted that there are two possibilities. One, Cohen committed perjury when he pleaded guilty before Judge Pauley. So if you commit perjury when you plead guilty, does that mean you're not guilty? I'm not really sure where this is going. I mean, he may have been committing perjury about some tangential issue, but been correct about his guilt. I don't know. Or two, Cohen committed perjury in his October 2023 testimony, about which I know nothing. But either way, it is perverse to cite the testimony as Schwartz did as evidence of Cohen's commitment to upholding the law. He's very agitated about this, I guess, on Twitter. One hitch, you've already guessed. The judge that Turley claimed attacked Cohen and ultimately sentenced him passed away in 2021. So the judge he meant to quote was Judge Jesse Furman, who earlier on Wednesday questioned Cohen's truthfulness in a written order. And I think we can all understand where that might come from. It didn't take long for the constitutional connoisseur to be tersely corrected. Judge Pauley died in 2021. Former federal prosecutor Preet Bharara tweeted, Judge Pauley passed away 3 years ago and, quote, Professor Turley has still not deleted this tweet, he chastised 2 hours later. I said Jerry Callow, C-A-L-L-O. That's what's the mix-up here. Journalist Bill Gruskin poked fun at Turley, writing, do his law students get 25% off tuition if they type Turley into the box for discount codes? And then, of course, did this happen during a seance? That's the one that showed up in the headline, because Judge Pauley died in 2021, reads a tweet by Doggin Trump. So, Doggin Trump with his first Raw Story headline, I think, maybe. Anyway, you get the idea. More ribbing of Turley follows. And, well, it's only one or two, but okay. I think you get the idea. I just wanted to know what Justice was hinting at there. Dead judge, you want to make sure nothing too crazy happening here. But, as it turns out, it's just crazy enough. It's so crazy, it just might work. Okay. Now, on to the rest of the day's agenda. Let's see, other things that I had for you. Oh, I mentioned that there was, I think this is the New York Post article that I was thinking of that had the weird quote in it, although I don't really want to read all the way through a New York Post article for any reason, although it's a lot shorter than it appears to be because most of the page is pop-up ads and promotions for other stories, so it won't take all that long, I guess. I think this was the one that the headline rings a bell. Donald Trump may not pay bond and instead let Letitia James seize Trump Tower, say insiders. That's expressed as : insiders. But that's kind of weird, and I don't like talking about insides and colons and whatnot if I don't have to. Anyway, Jennifer Gould is the author of this piece. I already closed the Raw Story piece. I forgot to credit the... All right, well, sometimes you miss. All right, let's see what's happening here, though. As Donald Trump faces a Monday deadline to post a $454 million bond. Monday, all right. In the civil fraud case against him in New York, insiders say he may be weighing too much. Weighing a little discussed option, doing nothing. The ex-president reportedly had been struggling to raise the cash for the bond, either from banks or wealthy friends. That's really funny. With his lawyers claiming on Monday that it was a practical impossibility. And I know he's got a team of lawyers trying to argue that that practical impossibility means that the bond amount should be lowered for various reasons, but it just doesn't look like anybody's going to bite on that. And it is particularly funny that he's actually reaching out, like trying to see, or other people are reaching out on his behalf to try and see if wealthy donors will put up the money. That's $500 million is a lot to ask for, but there are people who have actual several billions of dollars, maybe tens of billions, even in some cases hundreds of billions of dollars. And it would be no skin off their nose. It easily dropped on a yacht, certainly. But yeah, he's finding out that the reality is that nobody really, trusts him or likes him that much. And when there's a political advantage in it, sure, but it's a highly risky endeavor right now. Anyway, while some reports have raised speculation that Trump may, quote, go nuclear. Okay, that's a new term for it. With a Chapter 11 filing to protect his prize, wink, wink, prize real estate assets across Manhattan, experts said bankruptcy would create unwelcome complications as the 2024 election season comes to a head. That's what Greg told us about. And I think he's got it right there. There's more. Somebody noting he's been there and done that, one insider close to Trump said, dismissing the prospect of a Chapter 11 filing. A third possibility, however, is to let the deadline pass, leaving it to New York Attorney General Letitia James to do what she will, including seizing Trump's bank accounts or buildings, including Trump Tower, from which he declared his 2016 presidential run, of course, and which famously includes his personal penthouse. Though, of course, he doesn't spend much time there these days. It's an option Trump appears to have considered, partly because he believes the chances are good that he could recover the assets on appeal. And even if he's forced to take his case to the U.S. Supreme Court, according to his friends, he thinks, I guess, this is a practicable alternative. I suppose he always thinks he's going to win on appeal. I don't know if anybody else does. But anyway, even if there's a taking, it doesn't mean he can't take it back later. A source close to Trump told the Post, a decision to do nothing poses risks of its own, among them that the New York AG's office has the right to sell off any properties it confiscates in order to recover the cash penalties it is owed. So is this there's the quote I was looking for. At least it's here. I wanted to make sure it was in this piece before I continued on with it. They are going after the money, and that's all he has a right to get back, not the buildings, unless the judgment is reversed before they're sold, said Adam Laitman Bailey, a New York-based attorney who's focused on the commercial real estate sector. Yeah, and that's true. I mean, they can seize the buildings. It's really troublesome, though. I mean, it's not really tops on the list for the state to seize the buildings, as symbolic as it would be. It leaves you with this enormous white elephant of a building that has a very negative connotation, that the value of which is in the tank, and it's your responsibility to put it on the market, warrant it to the extent that it's warrantable, and sell it off. And I mean, then there's there's all sorts of trouble that goes along with that. Any real estate deal has got problems. They'd much rather seize cash or things that are much more easily liquidated than weirdo buildings like this one of indeterminate value. But yes, they could seize it and sell it and then keep the cash. And if by some miracle on appeal Trump wins, he can then be, it would be a reasonable thing for the court to say, well, you would be made whole in this case by giving you back the cash that was raised from the sale of the buildings. Well, I want the buildings back. Well, you can't get those back. Unless, of course, he manages to win his appeal before they're able to sell the building, which is a possibility, given that, I don't know how many people are going to want to buy that rat's nest and deal with the problems from it and all the negative connotations of it. I suppose it could be the case. I mean, Trump's friends might help him most by not doing anything there and nobody bidding on the building so that New York can't liquidate it. And I think they see that possibility and don't really want to go that route. Anyway, sources friendly with Trump say the ex-president believes he has a strong case, which is part of the signs of his dementia. Anyway, among other considerations, if the decision is not overturned, it will have, this is where the people start giving these dumb quotes, it'll have a chilling effect on people who do business in New York because it could happen to anyone, according to one insider, which is just an admission that any one of the people sitting atop the business, finance, real estate games in New York will admit readily, if not attributed to them by name, that they too are involved in lots of fraud. Anyway, this is the quote I was interested in. It's one thing to say, well, let's see, if this happens, people will flee New York with their money, or there will be a chilling effect because people who do business in New York, it could happen to anyone. Then this one, there will be severe consequences, not an insurrection. People will stop doing business in New York. No one will take the risk, and lenders are now spooked. The real estate market is already a disaster. That does sound like him. With office buildings worth a fraction of what they were once worth, and they are metastasizing, and that doesn't sound like Trump. There are metastasizing effects when a large part of the city's budget is from real estate. And that part does sound like Trump because it's muddled and garbage. A large part of the city's budget is from real estate. You mean real estate taxes or various other income that comes from tapping real estate development in New York? Maybe, sort of, kind of. But just what a weird thing to throw in there. Like, there'll be severe consequences. I think everybody's mind is already along the lines of, well, the severe consequences would be that rich people would be worried about investing in real estate in New York. Okay, I mean, bad conclusion to reach, really, if you're an honest broker, but you're probably not. So, good conclusion, because you're a cheater. You're worried about getting caught cheating because a big cheater just got caught. I can understand that. Right, but I don't think anybody was thinking, well, one of the consequences could be insurrection. All the rich guys will arm themselves and mobs and sack, what? The Capitol of New York, the City Hall, what exactly? World Trade Center? No, that's our Freedom Tower. What do you attack? I don't know. An insurrection? And that was the sort of thing that made me think, like, are they taking phone calls from John Barron on this? There'll be consequences, big consequences in New York. Not an insurrection, like people were saying. No insurrection. You're the insurrection. I don't know who else has that on their minds. Although, I mean, like I say, metastasizing is just not a Trump word, typically. I don't know. Is the rest of it muddled enough to possibly be Trump? And if it's not, and I mean, I guess the odds are that it's not, who else is out there throwing around? Well, one of the consequences could be, I mean, it won't be, but it could be, and to the extent that I need to clear this up, it won't be an insurrection. I don't know. That's weird, and just maybe, I don't know. Maybe that's just a random glitch on their part. Their brain is as messed up as Trump's is, and that's all there is. That's all it takes to explain it away. All right. I think we're nearly at the end of the article, but there was one other weird thing in here. There were one source close to Trump insisted that he could raise funds from wealthy friends and supporters, but so far has not chosen this path. Well, as it turns out, had he chosen the path, it wouldn't have made any difference because, no, it's not really an option that's available to him. They're just not going to do it. But this was an interesting construction. He has not chosen this path. He's not, as he says, an I'm passing the hat man. He doesn't want pity or for anyone to feel sorry for him. Yes, he does. The source claimed. He will do what he has to do. He has plenty of wealthy friends who would help him if he asked, but he's not asking as far as I'm aware. Well, now he has other people asking for him, and he doesn't have plenty of wealthy friends. He knows lots of wealthy people, but they're not his friends. Nobody is his friend, and he's friends with nobody. And I love that part. I'm not the passing the hat man. He's been passing the hat for years. Everybody give me $5 and I'll attack the bad guys for you. And then, of course, this guy is primarily known as a hat guy. He's actually literally chiefly known for the hats. And I suppose he's not known as a pass the hat guy so much because instead his gig is to sell the hats to people and then keep the money from the hat sales. It's not passing the hat and telling people to put $5 in it. He's handing them a hat and then asking for $10, $20 in exchange for the hat. It's just weird for somebody who's primarily identified with hats, particularly those wacko red hats, for that to be said about them and for it to be factually wrong, since he's been stealing people's low-dollar donations for years about this, and he also doesn't have the wealthy friends who will bail him out. And there's another Post article about that today, too. I closed that one up, but basically it was what Greg told us, that the wealthy friends who usually tend to back him up on things when it doesn't cost them extra dollars are not showing up for this bad bet. So, anyway, I just thought that was of interest. Now, other happenings in courtrooms and hearing rooms around the country need some attention as well. And I want to revisit a couple other stories. First, we can revisit the SB4 story with an explainer of the situation from Steve Vladek, who I think, in my quick skim of the first couple paragraphs of his piece here, I think helps clarify some things. It's still a little hazy. I mean, I'm sort of getting it, but I'm not positive that I was able to convey it correctly to what was going on, or convey it yesterday as well as it could. But I think we did a pretty good job helping people figure out, okay, the procedural posture of the case, right? That the district court put a injunction on enforcement of SB4, and that the Fifth Circuit put an administrative stay on the injunction, thereby freeing Texas to go ahead and enforce. But then there was an administrative stay from the Supreme Court on the administrative stay from the Fifth Circuit on the injunction from the district court that froze things up again. Then they removed that and sent it back. And once the Supreme Court's administrative stay expired, the only existing administrative stay was that of the Fifth Circuit. And the effect of the administrative stay of the Fifth Circuit was to stay the injunction and therefore free Texas to go. And then the Fifth Circuit said, wait a second, actually, maybe no, let's not let let Texas enforce this thing until we've had a chance to game this out in court. And then it started to really go crazy when we figured out, all right, the Fifth Circuit has two separate panels working on this case. One considering the legal merits of SB4's claim to constitutionality, which is thin, and another considering the whole procedure. Who's got a stay? Who doesn't have a stay? What are the effects of the stay? And have they met the requirements ordinarily demanded in order to impose such a stay? A totally separate set of questions, and apparently a separate panel handling it. So it really gets to flowchart territory. Well, let's take a look at what Steve Vladek has to say about it. 30 hours of SB4 whiplash. That sounds about right. That's the headline here. After a whirlwind of technical litigation developments, Texas's controversial new immigration law is back on hold as of late Tuesday night. How did we get here, and what happens now? Steve Vladek has a talent for straightening this stuff out, I think. Welcome back to, he says, his One First. One First is his Substack newsletter. So I'll welcome you on his behalf here. I'm breaking, he says, from the normal Monday-Thursday publication pattern, and also making this article available for free to non-subscribers as it happens. That's good news. Because it's been a truly chaotic day and a half here in Texas. He's in Texas himself with regard to legal developments concerning the state's controversial new immigration law, SB4. And I thought it would be helpful to try to put it into, one hopefully accessible narrative exactly what's happened and why. Good luck. Well, if anyone can do it, then someone will. And it might even be Steve Vladek. First, how we got here, SB4 and the first two suits challenging it. He's written before about SB4. He's giving you some links to those previous articles, which he says, to make a very long story short, too late for that for us, but creates a novel kind of state-level deportation regime by creating state law crimes relating to immigration status and creating a state-level process for moving those convicted of those crimes to the nearest international port of entry. In case that had somehow escaped you, that's what's going on. We didn't spend a great deal of time talking about what was actually being legislated in SB4, just that it was a weird outrage for reasons that Vladek will get to in a moment. Now, so essentially it's as he says, creating a state-level deportation regime by creating state law crimes relating to immigration status and creating a state-level process for deportation. The law was designed, at least in some respects, deliberately to provoke a conflict with the Supreme Court's 2012 ruling in Arizona versus the United States. There was some mention of that yesterday, in which a 5-3 majority, including Chief Justice Roberts, sided largely with the federal government in blocking a less aggressive effort by Arizona to also create a state-level immigration crime. Arizona is what they would call a classic preemption case. I added a few words into there, but Arizona is a classic preemption case. What are we talking about? With the Supreme Court holding that the federal statutory scheme setting forth immigration policy and governing immigration enforcement bars states from having different policies and enforcement mechanisms. They are preempted from acting in the field. The federal government occupies this field. The only plausible ways around it are to argue that it should be overruled, i.e., what they're basically saying is why the only plausible way for Texas to win is to say, well, yes, Arizona versus the United States stands as precedent directly opposing our claims, but we should just overrule that crap and make a new precedent entirely and just say, the court got it wrong way back when in 2012. So you could do that, but of course it would take the Supreme Court to do it. Or you could rely upon Texas's equally novel and independently problematic claim that its constitutional right to self-defense, that's what they love to point to and claim they're entitled to do, overrides the federal statutes that, under the Arizona ruling, bar states from having their own immigration regimes. And it's not just the Arizona ruling that bars states from having their own immigration regimes. That, too, was referred to yesterday. That's just always been the case. It's who gets to decide what the national borders are and what it takes to enter this country. Well, this country does, not little parts of it, not independent states within it, but the country itself. Who gets to enter the United States? The United States will tell you the answer to that, not some portion of it. That's essentially what's at stake here. The key for present purposes is that either avenue to upholding SB4, either overruling the Arizona case and all the precedent that goes with it, or saying, well, Texas is invoking a portion of the Constitution that overrides everything. The problem with either one of those is upholding SB4 would require something really novel, and the less radical path of the two can only come from the Supreme Court. In other words, it's actually the less radical would be for the Supreme Court to just say, 2012, ancient history, we had it all wrong, 5-3 decision. No, we overrule it and say something has radically changed in the last 12 years such that we're throwing out precedent that really reinforced 150 years of prior precedent. SB4 was originally set to go into effect on Tuesday, March 5th, but in a consolidated ruling in a pair of lawsuits filed in federal court in Austin, one by the federal government and one by private non-governmental immigration groups, like we mentioned yesterday when Chris Geidner's article was on the menu, a district judge on Thursday, February 29th, the last day of February this year, issued a preliminary injunction, remember, barring SB4 from going into effect, concluding that SB4 is clearly preempted by federal law, especially under the Arizona case, and not giving much stock to the constitutional self-defense claim. Where basically this is the claim that they've been using for a number of things, for a number of years, where Greg Abbott says immigration is really an invasion, and Texas has the right under the Constitution to repel an invasion, even in the absence of any assistance from the federal government. Well, immigration is not an invasion, and you're not repelling one. And no, that does not trigger the self-defense provisions of the Constitution in the opinion of the court. And that's who gets to interpret those things. The upshot of the injunction was that SB 4 would not go into effect until and unless an appellate court acted on it. And then, of course, an appellate court did kind of act upon it, and this is where we create a second level of problems. They say, well, we'll have an administrative stay on the injunction. All right, but that's not really acting on the merits of the case. That's you doing a thing, but is that enough of a thing to satisfy the district court's interpretation of the injunction? Well, the injunction will not go into effect until an appellate court acts on the merits of the injunction, but they didn't. All right, next up, and I know we're bumping up against the break here, but we'll set it up before we leave. The Fifth Circuit's March 2nd order and the applications to SCOTUS. So now, we have it left at this. The upshot of the injunction from the district court, SB 4 won't go into effect until and unless an appellate court acts upon it. Enter the Fifth Circuit. That's the appellate court that comes up next. Texas promptly appealed Judge Ezra's district court ruling and asked the Fifth Circuit for a stay pending appeal, an order that would allow SB 4 to go into effect while Texas's appeal played out. 2 days after Judge Ezra's injunction on Saturday, March 2nd, a 3-judge motions panel, remember, that's one of 2 panels, the motions panel of the Fifth Circuit, that's Judges Clement, Engelhardt, and Ramirez, granted a stay by a 2-to-1 vote, but in a way that was itself complicated. Of course it was. Of course it was. First, the panel styled its intervention as an administrative stay. That is, it's important to note, something that's supposed to be a temporary block on the lower court ruling to buy the Court of Appeals more time to consider whether to freeze it for the entire appeal. Second, it deferred a ruling on whether to issue that longer stay, an actual stay based on the merits of the case, to the merits panel, a different 3-judge panel that would hear Texas's appeal of the injunction itself. We'll go back over this again in a minute or so when we return from the break, just so it's fresh in your mind, and you need to draw this chart in your head. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Are you mapping this out in your head? I mean, it's still complex, but I think Steve Vladeck is doing an admirable job parsing it out. He's using enough detail in his language that we can, if we strain, make some sense of what's happening here. Right? Judge Ezra, it's not Ezra Klein, it's his last name. Judge Ezra is the district court judge, the trial court judge who initially handles the lawsuits from both the federal government and the non-governmental organizations who say SB 4 is a pile of crap, you got to stop this thing. It's totally unconstitutional. You should delay things at a minimum so that it doesn't go into effect because it's unconstitutional. It will be unfair for everybody to have to live with this totally unconstitutional law just because it takes a long time to come to the formal conclusion and have it come to a place where it can come to rest through the appellate court system, acknowledging that it is, in fact, in our view anyway, unconstitutional. Well, everybody's view, really, but of course, this is one of those games where they're about telling everybody that they're pre-wrong and recognizing that we may end up there. In the meantime, not until at least someone more authoritative than a bunch of yahoos in Texas say, no, this is totally constitutional, should we actually have to impose this on somebody. So Judge Ezra says, yeah, sure, what the hell? What do I know? I think it's unconstitutional. I'm one of those people that went to law school and believes in the old school stuff where the federal government gets to set immigration policy and that's it. But you never know when the Supreme Court, for instance, will rule us all pre-wrong about everything. I acknowledge that at this point, but in the meantime, this law is enjoined from taking effect. Right. Then the Fifth Circuit not only says, well, we're going to sort of reverse that, but we're going to do it sort of timidly. There's two issues at hand here. One, the underlying constitutionality of the bill. That's one. And two, the question of what can we do really quickly without coming to a conclusion about the underlying constitutionality, just to F things up a little bit more. And the answer is we could put an administrative stay on the injunction that's blocking the bill. We don't know if we're right. We don't know if we're wrong. But if we make it temporary enough, it shouldn't matter. So, they had one panel say, you just deal with the procedural crap, come up with a way to free up Texas to do bad things to people while we're waiting. And another panel will be the one that's in charge of finding a way to say that this otherwise, for normal people, totally unconstitutional thing is really super constitutional and no problem, go ahead, go for it. But we realize that would be pretty bold to just right out of the gate say, I don't know, we've seen this case has existed for about 5 seconds, but we're pretty sure it's so constitutional that everything's fine. We recognize that there's a problem here. You three decide to come up with a mechanism that will allow Texas to hurt people quickly, and you three ponder for a while in the meantime. Once these three have said we're going to allow Texas to start hurting people again, then you won't feel any time pressure to start hurting people. You can come up with the gobbledygook that's going to make this junk constitutional, right? The people who are supposed to come up with the reason why this stupid crap is constitutional, even though it isn't, you're the merits panel. And you people who are just supposed to throw a wrench in the works so that we can start hurting people right away, come up with a procedural reason why it's okay to hurt people immediately, you're the motions panel. And if other people want to fight about whether or not your motion that allows Texas to start hurting people quickly is valid or not, you'll handle those questions. In the meantime, you guys warm up for dealing with the constitutionality questions over here on the merits panel. Does that help clear anything up? It's weird and it's dumb, maybe. But, yeah, I mean, they could combine it all into one panel. I don't know that it would make it any less dumb to do that, though. But that's what's happening here. So the Fifth Circuit comes in, issues a stay pending appeal. Who's handling the appeal? Well, the merits appeal. These guys over here. Who says there's a stay? Different three guys over there, but all Fifth Circuit. Anyway, so there you go. They now issue a stay pending appeal, an order that would allow SB 4 to go into effect while Texas's appeal played out in front of the merits panel over there in the other corner of the Fifth Circuit. So, first, the panel styled its, as we said, its intervention an administrative stay, which is a temporary thing and needs to clear fewer hurdles. So it looks less corrupt for them to say, well, if we're giving a temporary administrative stay, not based on any conclusion on the merits of the case, which we haven't reached yet, then you can't touch it. It's basically a discretionary stay, and you got to let it stand. Second, it deferred a ruling on whether to issue a longer stay based on constitutionality grounds. That goes to the merits panel, a different three-judge panel that would hear Texas's appeal of the injunction itself. Third, it put its own ruling, because it was so sure of itself, it decided to put its own ruling on hold for 7 days to give the federal government and the private plaintiffs time to ask the Supreme Court to step in and keep SB 4 on hold, right? So you see what's happening here? One more time. The district court says it's a injunction. We're putting an injunction against this enforcing SB 4 because it's pretty clearly unconstitutional. The Fifth Circuit says, well, I'm not so sure about the constitutional import of all of this, but here's what we're going to do. we will put an administrative stay, which is temporary and so therefore less assailable than a ordinary stay, for which we don't have the grounds yet. Remember, the merits panel is working on coming up with the grounds, but they haven't done it yet. So in the meantime, a motions panel will say, just until we figure out what the hell's going on here, we'll put an administrative stay on the injunction. Texas, you can go ahead. Are you sure? That's really super crazy. You really think you're going to get to, one of the things you're supposed to have in order to impose something like an administrative stay, even though it's just temporary, is you're supposed to be able to show that you have a pretty reasonable shot at winning on the merits, which the other panel is handling, right? So, if it looks like you have a pretty reasonable shot at this, then fine. You can get a temporary stay. But usually, no. It doesn't really look like, ordinarily, under an ordinary interpretation of federal law and who gets to make immigration law, like you're going to be able to win on this. So what's the deal with this temporary thing? Are you sure? And then they hedge and they say, well, I'll tell you what. It's either because we feel bad about overstepping our bounds. I doubt that's the issue. Or because in the end we might end up losing because this is really audacious. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do. First, yes, the motions panel is going to impose an administrative stay against the injunction. But out of an abundance of caution and fairness, we will impose how did they phrase it here? We're going to put our own ruling imposing the administrative stay on hold for 7 days to give the Supreme Court a chance to weigh in. So the district court says injunction against SB4. The appeals court says administrative stay on that injunction against enforcing SB4. So you can enforce SB4. But they also say, on top of that, just to be super fair, we're going to put our administrative stay on hold. So now there's a hold on enforcing the administrative stay, which itself is a hold on enforcement of the injunction, which is itself a hold on the enforcement of the law. We're back to blocking the law. Now, giving the Supreme Court a chance to weigh in and say what it will do. And then, okay, so now at this point, we have a hold on the ruling for 7 days to give SCOTUS a chance. Judge Ramirez publicly dissented from the first of these holdings, by the way, and not the second or third. We might have to sort that out later. Now, in other words, because of the Fifth Circuit motions panel's intervention, SB4 was set to go into effect at the end of the day on Saturday, March 9th. But they're holding it to give Alito a chance to step in. Justice Alito is the circuit justice for the Fifth Circuit. That means that all emergency applications in cases coming from the Fifth Circuit and its 3 states, Louisiana, Mississippi, and Texas, start with him. I mean, he's no kind of gatekeeper for the Fifth Circuit, but that's the way it is. That's what happened with the emergency applications filed by both the federal government and the private plaintiffs in the SB4 case, asking Alito, and through him the full court, to keep SB4 on hold. How? By vacating the administrative stay that the Fifth Circuit panel had issued and then put a temporary hold on March 2nd. At first, Alito moved quickly, but at least we understand in the atmosphere in which he's moving here now, right? By the end of the day, on Monday, March 4th, Alito had issued 2 administrative stays of his own, which kept SB4 on hold through, we learned this the other day, 5 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time on Wednesday, March 13th. It's Central Time, of course, I think, right? Or no, it's Eastern Time because this is his stay now. Everything shifts. That's right. So Eastern Daylight Time on Wednesday, March 13th, while the full court considered what to do. Then, Last Tuesday, March 12th, Alito acted again to extend his own arbitrary deadline, keeping SB 4 on hold through 5 o'clock Eastern Daylight Time this Monday, March 18th. As I noted yesterday, he says on social media, Alito has a unique habit of imposing arbitrary deadlines that the court ends up being unable to meet. Oh, okay. Of the 21 administrative stays that justices have issued since the beginning of the October 2020 term, okay, 11 have had no expiration date, 10 have had deadlines. 9 of the 10 with deadlines have come from Justice Alito, who's had to issue 8 extensions of those deadlines. So it's sort of a personal preference thing here, and it almost never works out. Anyway, in this case, Alito's second arbitrary deadline, which ended up being this past Monday, caused real mischief because it came and went. That's what Chris Geidner told us about on Monday. Surprisingly, with no public action from either him or the court. Thus, at 5 o'clock EDT this Monday, Alito's administrative stays expired, and SB 4 publicly appeared to go into effect, at least for a few minutes, because at 5:04 Eastern Time, the Supreme Court's press corps had received further extensions of the administrative stays from Alito, putting SB 4 back on hold. It is not clear at exactly what time Alito issued those orders. I've been arguing, Steve Vladeck says, for years that the Supreme Court needs to timestamp these kinds of rulings, but it still doesn't. To public appearances, though, SB 4 was briefly in effect Monday afternoon. Before it wasn't. If nothing else, the awkward denouement seems to suggest that the court had been very close to ruling on Monday afternoon, or else Alito would have acted to extend the administrative stays earlier, but it ended up not doing so. Now, next section, the full court's Tuesday afternoon ruling and the Barrett-Kavanaugh concurrence. That brings us to yesterday, which is now, I think, the day before yesterday. Shortly after 2 p.m. EDT, the full court acted on the 2 pending emergency applications and denied them over public dissents from Justices Sotomayor, Kagan, and Jackson. Because the court's order also vacated Justice Alito's administrative stays, SB 4 went into effect as soon as it came down. The what is easy enough to explain. The why is quite a bit messier, even messier than this, okay. As is typical for Supreme Court rulings on emergency applications. Sigh, he says parenthetically, one with a link of some kind. There was no majority opinion or majority explanation. But the 2 justices whose votes were most likely the difference, Kavanaugh and Barrett, signed a concurring opinion written by Barrett to explain their votes. That opinion made 2 very different points. First, it articulated the novel view that the Supreme Court ought not to be in the business of reviewing true administrative stays by courts of appeals. Oh, interesting. What constitutes a true one? I don't know, but they don't think that they should even be in the business of reviewing them, which they are, by design, supposed to be short-term interventions solely to give the court time to consider whether to issue a stay for the duration of the appeal. Although one could quibble, and the separate dissenting opinions by Justices Sotomayor and Kagan both did quibble, with whether it's fair to characterize the Fifth Circuit's open-ended intervention here as a true administrative stay, the upshot was that the justices most likely to be the median votes here provided a procedural, not substantive, reason for allowing SB 4 to go into effect. I'm going to have a lot more to say about Justice Barrett's procedural arguments in tomorrow's bonus issue, though I don't know that one will be available to us for free without subscribing to his Substack. But this is a banner week or two for these weird opinions about the validity of certain motions by the Supreme Court and by other federal courts. This brings us back to the decision we were discussing with Armando the other day about whether or not they had 4 or 5 votes to grant cert or not, right? And whether or not essentially the court's intervention at a certain point in a case was in fact warranted under its ordinary rules, or whether they could just reshape what was happening to temporarily appear to fit under their rules or not. But of course, the Supreme Court being supreme, there isn't much you can do to argue with it when it decides what its decision is supposed to mean. Critically, though, the opinion in SB4 didn't stop there. Second, the Barrett-Kavanaugh concurrence went out of its way to nudge the Fifth Circuit, noting not only that the Fifth Circuit should be able to rule on the stay pending appeal promptly, but that if a decision does not issue soon, the applicants may return to this court. The Fifth Circuit had already scheduled oral argument on Texas's appeal for April 3rd, a fact of which the justices would clearly have been aware. But instead of suggesting that the Fifth Circuit could wait until then, the last part of the Barrett-Kavanaugh concurrence seemed like a not-so-subtle shove to the Court of Appeals to not wait that long. And it isn't that long, April 3rd. It's very interesting. And here a lengthy excerpt from the Barrett opinion, but there's some highlighting here. Before this court intervenes on the emergency docket, the Fifth Circuit should be the first mover. It should apply the Niken factors and, reference to another case, and decide the motion for a stay pending appeal. It can presumably do so promptly. If a decision of this court does not issue soon, the applicants may return to this court. Okay. Well, a lot of folks on both sides of the ideological spectrum focused on the first takeaway from the Barrett-Kavanaugh concurrence and missed or downplayed the second. Thus, the ruling was portrayed as a major victory by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, who should be having no victories, and those who are publicly supporting Texas's unilateral efforts to take over national immigration policy, and provoked loud criticism from folks more legally opposed to those efforts and or worried that this ruling signaled the court's willingness to revisit Arizona. At least in its immediate aftermath, that reaction was understandable. SB 4 was now in effect. But the second part of the Barrett-Kavanaugh concurrence, e.g. its discussion of why administrative stays aren't value neutral, wasn't directed to a public audience. It was directed to the Fifth Circuit. And although a different panel might have reacted differently, its message was received rather quickly by this one. So, on to the next stage. The Fifth Circuit responds twice. And why might they respond twice? Well, I'm not sure this is the reason, but I suppose if you have 2 different Fifth Circuit panels working on the same case, you might expect to hear from them twice. At 6:01 EDT last night, and I think it's the night before last now, less than 4 hours after the Supreme Court ruled, the 3-judge Fifth Circuit panel that was, and still is, set to hear Texas's full appeal of the district court's preliminary injunction on April 3rd, that would be the merits panel, issued an order of its own. In it, the court set Texas's motion for a stay pending appeal for oral argument this morning, and I think that was yesterday, via Zoom at 10 o'clock a.m. Central Daylight Time, 11 o'clock EDT, right after the show yesterday. In other words, having previously taken no action on Texas's motion for a stay pending appeal, a stay of what? A stay of the district court injunction. So having taken no action on Texas's motion for that stay, which the motions panel had deferred to the merits panel. How do you like that? Who should handle this motion? The merits panel or the motions panel? I guess the motions panel, right? Motions panel. What do you have to say about this motion? Ask the other panel. What? All right. but that's what they did. The merits panel then, in response to this, which we learned included Chief Judge Richmond, Judge Oldham, and Judge Ramirez, as opposed to the other lineup named earlier, which I forget. Okay, so where are we here in this? In other words, having previously taken no action on Texas's motion for a stay, the merits panel was impelled by the Barrett-Kavanaugh concurrence to at least hold arguments on the motion, presumably with an eye toward resolving it one way or another in short succession. If things had ended there, the oral argument could have been seen as a procedural concession to the Supreme Court, not a substantive one. But then, at 10:44 Eastern Time, because lower federal courts do timestamp their orders, that's how they know it was 10:44, the panel acted again. In a short order, the panel noted that a majority of the panel that the administrative stay entered by a motions panel on March 2nd, 2024 should be lifted. Wow. Just trying to figure out exactly what, does that read correctly? In a short order, the panel noted that a majority of the panel that the administrative stay entered by a motions panel. I don't know. There's like a word missing here. It seems like Judge Oldham wrote a short dissent. The majority of the panel, though, ruled that the administrative stay entered by the motions panel should be lifted. I guess that's what's missing there. There's the word, we'll insert the word ruled there. A majority of the panel ruled that the administrative stay entered by the motions panel should be lifted. Okay. Which I guess puts the only operative order left as the district court's injunction against enforcing SB 4. Okay. So in other words, he offers this. As of 10:44 EDT, less than 9 hours after the Supreme Court had allowed it to go into effect, SB 4 was back on hold. I guess we read it right. Because the Fifth Circuit had dissolved the administrative stay that had been blocking Judge Ezra's injunction. Phew. Part of the problem with describing these developments is that word terms like hold and in effect could be describing the law itself or Ezra's injunction against it. Yes, there's a real mix-up here. And also, of course, the difference between injunction and hold and stay. They all sort of mean the same thing in the vernacular, but they're different actual terms of art in the courts, and they have different implications and different standards for imposing them, even though they all do the same thing. Even though they do the same thing, they may have the opposite effect in terms of whether or not a law is working or not. If you enjoin a law from taking effect, you block it. If you put a stay on the injunction against the law, you allow it to be enforced. You see, this is very confusing. Okay, so there we are. And another clip from what happens, the order of the court dissolving the Fifth Circuit's administrative stays. So what happened? Here's Vladek trying to sum up. My best guess, and it's only that, I guess, having started preparing for yesterday's hastily scheduled oral argument, which the entire panel likely agreed to after reading Barrett's concurrence, Chief Judge Richmond decided not to wait that long. Judge Ramirez had been the dissenter on the original motions panel, so her opposition to the administrative stay was already a matter of record. That's significant because even though yesterday's argument is going forward on technically different questions, i.e. should the Fifth Circuit issue a stay pending appeal, than the one the panel acted on the night before, i.e. should the administrative stay remain in effect until we answer that question, it's really difficult to see how Chief Judge Richmond might think the answer to the first question, is yes if she thought the answer to the second question was no. Wow, that is pretty complicated. So in other words, the first question, should the Fifth Circuit issue a stay pending appeal? If you answer yes to that, but your answer to the second question, should the administrative stay remain in effect until we answer that question, is no, that's going to be pretty complicated. Okay, I can see the complexity of it, even if I don't think we can unravel it for you. But maybe Steve Vladeck can after this break, which is coming up. What happens now? If you're still following, what should be clear is that 1. Judge Ezra's injunction is now back in effect. 2. SB4 is thus on hold. And 3. The next question for the Fifth Circuit is whether to issue a stay pending appeal, a less temporary kind of stay, of Judge Ezra's injunction, which would put SB4 back into effect if it were granted. Will it be? Let's see. Hi, everybody. It's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and Patreon.com, Patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, Patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the last segment of today's Kagro in the Morning Show. Let's see if we can't get through the conclusion of Steve Vladeck's analysis here. I know it was supposed to clear it up, and but that's never going to be a short thing, clearing up this mess. I think we've cleared up some of what's going on in your mental flow charts, but I don't know. We'll see what's going to come next, or at least what he predicts happens next. As he said, what should be clear at this point is that Judge Ezra's injunction is now back in effect, and thus SB4 is currently on hold, and that the next question for the Fifth Circuit is whether or not to issue a more permanent stay pending appeal. In other words, let's put it all back on hold until we can figure out the true underlying merits of the constitutionality of this law. Will they do that? And when? As I noted, I think such a move is very unlikely. Again, because Chief Judge Richman has now tipped her hand. All right. To me, the bigger question is whether this panel, the Fifth Circuit, moves quickly to formalize its denial of Texas's motion for a stay pending appeal, or whether it folds that denial into a full ruling on Texas's appeal after the April 3rd argument on the merits, i.e., whether Judge Ezra's preliminary injunction should stand, period. Let's assume for the moment that the panel acts before April 3rd to formally deny Texas's stay application to reinforce SB4. The most important point is that such a move would keep SB4 on hold. Texas would then have three choices. It could seek rehearing of that order from the full Fifth Circuit, an en banc rehearing. 2, it could seek emergency relief from the Supreme Court. Or 3, it could sit back and wait for the resolution of its appeals on the merits. But yeah, option 2, by the way, is the one that is the more, I don't know, it seems so alarming that this Supreme Court has, I guess willingly, given who makes up the majority of the Supreme Court, basically set itself up as a 24/7 SCOTUS hotline for Ken Paxton, perhaps one of the most corrupt state attorneys general that there is, both, again, on the merits and just personally. Like he's legally backwards and upside down and reactionary and ungrounded in precedent, but so is the Supreme Court, and he's just personally corrupt on top of it all. So anyway, difficult situation here, but they've basically, between this case and 10 others, and with the willing collusion of a compliant Fifth Circuit as well, and that's by design, you'd basically have this 24/7 hotline ping-ponging whatever nonsense happens to occur to Ken Paxton to throw a monkey wrench in the works. He's got a 24/7 hotline to both the Fifth Circuit and the Supreme Court to lend credence to these stupid ideas that fall out of his skull. And, everybody else has to wait months to figure out whether or years to figure out whether their crackpot theories hold water. And I don't know why, of all people in the world, Ken Paxton should have access to this kind of system. But anyway, all right. So those are the options. Seek rehearing from the full Fifth Circuit, seek emergency relief from the Supreme Court, or sit back and wait for a resolution of its appeal on the merits. That's where most people have to sit. Rehearing en banc in the Fifth Circuit is always something to consider in a context like this. That said, the fact that Texas's loss would have come at the hands of Chief Judge Richmond may augur against it here. Texas would need 9 of the Fifth Circuit's 17 active judges to support a full court rehearing. And even if Chief Judge Richmond is, and this is a remarkable statement, even if Chief Judge Richmond is not among the median votes on the full court, she's close enough to it that I think Texas would have trouble getting more than 7 votes both because of who she is and because of the Barrett-Kavanaugh concurrence. It would be close, but it's not clear to me that there are 9 judges who would support rehearing en banc of a denial of a stay pending appeal from this panel. And Texas would likely not want to risk trying for en banc review and not getting it. The Barrett-Kavanaugh concurrence may also weigh against Texas seeking emergency relief from the Supreme Court. Again, because Chief Justice Roberts was in the majority in Arizona, Texas presumably needs both Justices Kavanaugh and Barrett to win this case, both on a stay pending appeal and on the merits. It's pretty hard to read both the concurring opinion itself and the optics of its existence as anything other than a sign that that's by no means a given. If either or both Justice Kavanaugh and Barrett were sympathetic to Texas on the merits, why write and sign such a wonky procedural opinion to explain why they're letting SB 4 go into effect? Or be so clear about the ability of the challengers to the law to come right back to the court? Although there are lots of analogies between what's happened here and the SB 8 case, that was the vigilante abortion enforcement case, there was no such separate statement from Kavanaugh or Barrett there. So, it's entirely possible that if the Richmond-Oldham-Ramirez panel, is that the motions panel or the merits panel? I can't remember now, and he should use that label instead. If that panel denies Texas's motion for a stay pending appeal, Texas will choose, probably, to wait for the merits argument on April 3rd before doing anything else. Option 3. At that point, things could again get interesting. Oh, really? Oh, no. Maybe Chief Judge Richmond is more sympathetic to reversing the district court's injunction on the merits than she is to freezing it through a stay. That's not remotely foreclosed by last night's vote to dissolve the administrative stay. But even if the panel reverses on the merits, last night's move suggests that a majority might still be wary of allowing SB4 to go into immediate effect, so that it could remain on hold while the federal government and private plaintiffs appeal to the Supreme Court, as they surely would. And if the panel does clear the way for SB4 to go into effect, in that scenario, the plaintiffs could also then ask the Supreme Court to keep it on hold. It's just amazing how many passes at the Supreme Court Ken Paxton's state gets here. Obviously, this last part is all speculative. What's not speculation is that SB4 is now on hold and is very likely to remain on hold at least through April 3rd, oral arguments on the merits. And for what it's worth, I expect it to remain on hold thereafter as well, either because the merits panel affirms Judge Ezra's preliminary injunction, or because it stays any reversal thereof. Either way, the Supreme Court is going to eventually have to resolve this case, but it might have the luxury of doing so through an appeal that gives it plenary consideration to this fall, rather than an emergency application that forces it to act next week. And whatever else might be said about how we got here, or over the role of the Barrett-Kavanaugh concurrence in the whiplash of the last few days, again, he promises to have more on that upcoming, it seems entirely possible that this is the precise outcome it was intended to provoke. So, interesting on about 18,000 different levels. And you can see how you get a headache pretty quickly, considering these things. And by the way, in case you're wondering, how come it's always the case that people argue endlessly over the meaning of cases like this on social media? Imagine trying to explain this, within the context of the however many characters. Well, now you get a lot more if you subscribe in Twitter, and on some of the other platforms, more characters, but you can't explain this. And to do this in the setting where everyone else can chime in the middle of your comments on something like this, you see that this is not going to be straightened out via social media. And it's also not likely something that, even a very smart observer of the news and the legal system who isn't versed in the terminology, whether that's because they're a practicing attorney, went to law school, or just learned it on their own. But if you aren't familiar with the terminology and the procedural aspects of what goes on in the courts, it's just that much easier to get lost in the explanation here. Two panels of the Fifth Circuit, people who don't have an inherent understanding of the different levels of the court, the district court, the appeals court, and the Supreme Court, that there's a difference between the underlying legal merits of the case and the motions practice legality surrounding the case. It makes it virtually impossible to cut through. And if you're having this discussion on social media and it's not 100% clear, it takes the whole text of any tweet just to clarify whose discussion you're talking about. Well, the Fifth Circuit said, well, which Fifth Circuit? Do you mean the merits panel or the motions panel? Oh, yeah, I have to actually clear that up as well. Wow. What a situation. Custom built to screw everything up in a country that has all of its discussions via social media now. All right. There's more. There are other things. I need to share some things with you. Let's say we'll make, I don't know. I've got two sources here from The Independent, the UK publication, and Rolling Stone. Why don't we go with Rolling Stone's coverage of what's going on here? Yesterday, some action on Capitol Hill in front of the faux impeachment panels. And the story here from Rolling Stone, who's reporting it here? Nikki McCann Ramirez on the byline of this one. Let's see if it'll let us actually read the original or not. Lev Parnas was one of the witnesses who appeared before one of the impeachment panels the other day as a Democratic witness. But just keep in mind the general character arc of Lev Parnas. It's been a couple of years where he's been on the part of the spectrum where he could be viewed by Democrats as offering material in support of their view. He's of course he's in legal trouble, and it all stems from his original stance in all of this, standing with Rudy Giuliani as an accomplice in attempting to manufacture a corruption case against Joe Biden, but all of it being an engineered case originally linked to Trump's first impeachment. You remember all of this. And now he's pretty much realized, oh yeah, this guy will throw you under the bus. He isn't standing by the people who tried to help him execute his stupid plan, and it's costing me and my family personally instead. So to hell with this guy. The best deal I can make for myself at this point is to flip and say, yeah, he and Rudy Giuliani asked me to help engineer a web of lies that would come to rest, hopefully at the time we thought, on Joe Biden's head, and it didn't work out, and I'm here to tell you how it happened. So here we go. Ex-Giuliani crony says Gopp's impeachment push is based on Russian lies. Of course, because he's moved back and forth between the two camps, that gives the opportunity to the Republicans to say he's just lying to save his own skin now, and we have to decide whether that may or may not be true. House Republicans are scrambling to salvage their probe against President Biden after a key informant is charged with lying to federal authorities. Not Lev Parnas, though he was charged with lying to federal authorities earlier in a slightly different context. It's a little bit like the Fifth Circuit's situation in SB4. You have to trace it all the way back and follow it all the way through in order to figure out what's going on. The Republican impeachment push against President Joe Biden has always rested on the thinnest of evidentiary ice, but with one of their key informants facing criminal charges, it's Smirnov, not Parnas, though he faced his own charges, for lying to federal investigators, that charade is now on the verge of falling apart. On Wednesday, the House Oversight Committee, which should never show its face in public again, but did anyway, one of the 3 Republican-controlled committees overseeing the Biden impeachment inquiry, held a hearing in an attempt to salvage their effort. Democrats brought in Lev Parnas, a former Rudy Giuliani crony who was a key figure in the Ukraine scandal that led to Trump's first impeachment. During his testimony, Parnas declared that he had found, quote, zero evidence of the Biden's corruption in Ukraine, and that, quote, no credible source has ever provided proof of criminal activity. No respectable Ukrainian official has ever said that the Bidens did anything illegal. More quotes. The only information ever pushed on the Bidens in Ukraine has come from one source and one source only: Russia and Russian agents, Parnas said. The impeachment proceedings that bring us here now are predicated on false information spread by the Kremlin. Of course, the difficulty is that earlier it was Donald Trump being impeached by or over information that was, well, information that he was trying to force Ukraine to produce. And he, I guess, can likewise say, well, maybe the Russians made that one up, except he's pro-Russian, so he doesn't want to lay it at their feet, which is weird. But okay, there we have it. In February, the Department of Justice charged former FBI informant Alexander Smirnov, whose claims Republicans used to bolster allegations of a corrupt bribery scheme involving Hunter Biden and the Ukrainian energy company Burisma, with 2 counts of making false statements to federal authorities. Prosecutors alleged Smirnov had falsely claimed that during 2 business meetings in 2015 and or 16, executives associated with Burisma admitted to him that they hired Hunter Biden to protect us through his dad from all kinds of problems. That was the quote from the Burisma officials, allegedly. Shortly after Smirnov's arrest, He told authorities that he had been in contact with high-level Russian intelligence officials who were involved in passing along a story about Hunter Biden. Smirnov's arrest was a disaster for the House Republicans, who scrambled to protect the already brittle reasoning on which they based their accusations of corruption against the Biden family. With Smirnov's credibility shot, Republicans brought forth Tony Bobulinski, is that right? As their primary witness on Tuesday. Bobulinski, a former business associate of Hunter Biden, who has since become a critic of the Biden administration, everybody's changing sides here, has leveled accusations of corruption against the Biden family with little evidence to back them up. During the hearing, he accused several Democratic members of the committee of lying to the American public on behalf of the Biden administration. It didn't go over well. Representative Robert Garcia, Democrat of California, called out Bobulinski for lying during a deposition provided to investigators. Bobulinski's testimony provided zero evidence of any sort of link between Hunter Biden and the president as far as it relates to the business dealings. And so once again, we're back to a hearing where no evidence is being provided of any sort of wrongdoing by POTUS, he said. Ranking member Jamie Raskin, of course, Democrat of Maryland, dismantled the Republican impeachment push during his own remarks to the committee, citing the nearly 20 fact witnesses who could not identify a single act of wrongdoing by President Biden, much less a high crime and misdemeanor, and who overwhelmingly testified that Biden was not involved in any of his family's business ventures. Needless to say, Republicans did not seem overly enthused at how the hearing played out. At one point, one member of the committee was heard complaining on a hot mic, that you, quote, can't make this stuff up. Except, well, that's what they were there trying to do. So it's like Jurassic Park. Geez, they said. I'm not even certain where the Jurassic Park thing weighs in. But all right, I just wanted to sort of note for the record that Lev Parnas was back on the scene. Does the Independent offer us anything else here? And will they let us see the original or not? Their headline, Lev Parnas dishes dirt on Rudy Giuliani and escaping the Trump cult in madcap Biden impeachment hearing. It does sound much more interesting, doesn't it? Andrew Feinberg, along with Eric Garcia, offering this on behalf of the Independent. The subheader reads, claimed former New York Mayor Giuliani tasked him with finding dirt on the Bidens so that an array of networks could spread misinformation about them. Well, okay, let's give it a look and see if we can't close things out for the day. The House Oversight Committee's latest attempt to hold an impeachment hearing, that's funny, on President Joe Biden took a bizarre turn on Wednesday when one of the three witnesses who gave evidence before the Republican-led panel began revealing unflattering information on former President Donald Trump's disgraced ex-personal lawyer, Rudolph Giuliani. Lev Parnas, a Ukrainian-American businessman who served time in prison for violating federal campaign finance laws and fraud charges, we do have that problem, told committee members that he'd been a key participant in a scheme to dig up dirt on Mr. Biden and his son Hunter in the run-up to the 2020 presidential election. He said Giuliani had tasked him with finding dirt on the Bidens so that an array of networks could spread misinformation about them, so Mr. Trump and his allies could damage the Bidens' reputations and secure the 2020 election for Trump. But Parnas, who admitted to being on supervised release after serving prison time for his offenses, told the panel that the allegations against the Bidens being peddled by the Republican majority were false. I have never wavered from saying that there was no evidence of the Bidens' corruption in Ukraine because there truly was none, he said in an opening statement. Continuing, Parnas said that the theories on which Republicans have based their impeachment inquiry into Mr. Biden are actually predicated on a bunch of false information that is being spread by the Kremlin and have no basis in fact. Throughout this entire situation, no credible source has ever provided proof of Joe or Hunter Biden's alleged corruption in Ukraine. No respectable Ukrainian official has ever said that the Bidens did anything illegal. And this, he said, as he rattled off a list of Ukrainian officials and nationals, who have publicly said that the president and his son were not implicated in any criminal activity. Parnas added that the CEO of Burisma, the Ukrainian energy company which employed Hunter Biden as a board member, had rejected a deal on criminal charges he faced in exchange for information on the Bidens, but turned over no such information. The only information ever pushed about Biden's and Ukraine has come from Russia and Russian agents, which everyone sitting here today knows, he said, pointing to the recent indictment of FBI ex-informant Alexander Smirnov on charges of fabricating the derogatory information about the Bidens, which figured prominently in an FBI form made public by the Republican majority. In my travels, I found precisely zero proof of the Bidens' criminality. Instead, what I learned is, we jumped here. What I learned was, in that time frame, was the true nature of the conspiracy that the Kremlin was forcing through Russian, Ukrainian, American, and other channels to interfere in our elections. Ultimately, this was meant to benefit Trump's reelection, which would in turn benefit Vladimir Putin, he said. Parnas, who first came to public attention when he was arrested during the House's first of 2 impeachment inquiries into Trump, was just one of 2 convicted felons to give evidence before the Republican-led panel at a hearing that uncovered no new evidence, but was heavy on unsubstantiated accusations by partisans with axes to grind. One of the Republican witnesses, James Galanis, testified by a remote video hookup from a federal prison in Alabama, where he is known as inmate 80739-198, although he's probably known by other names there among the inmates. In a transcribed interview last month, Galanis, a former business partner of Hunter Biden, told investigators that President Biden never held any role with any business entity connected to his son. He also said under oath that he had no knowledge of Mr. Biden undertaking any official action to benefit the business venture in which he, Archer, and Hunter Biden were involved. Did we miss the mention of Archer before? But the convicted fraudster, that is a problem, who is part of a crime family whose head, his father, was prosecuted by Giuliani in the 1980s, told the panel on Wednesday that the president had been slated to be involved in one of the companies after leaving the vice presidency in 2017, even though he never had any documented involvement in that venture at issue. Under questioning from Republicans, the incarcerated felon described Hunter Biden as offering what he called a Biden lift to potential business deals through his father's involvement, telling members that Hunter Biden had been actively trying to leverage his family name to bolster his business endeavors. Yet, in a 2018 court opinion, U.S. District Judge Ronnie Abrams said it was Galanis, not Hunter Biden, who was leveraging Hunter's family name for his own gain. She wrote that Galanis had been attempting to use his business partner and co-defendant, Devin Archer, to gain access to Mr. Biden, explaining how other co-defendants of Galanis had described Archer as the biggest whale of anyone, the biggest show pony of all time, and a total effing whale. In conversations that were recorded and admitted into evidence against them. He also told another co-defendant that 2 of Archer's respective partners were Chris Hines and Hunter Biden, the stepson of the Secretary of State John Kerry, Chris Hines, and the son of the Vice President, Joe Biden, respectively. The other Republican witness was Tony Bobulinski. We heard about him earlier, an ex-naval officer and ally of Trump who first came into the public eye when he appeared at a Trump-sponsored press conference ahead of one of the ex-president's 2020 debates with Mr. Biden. Bobulinski, who was represented by an attorney from Elections LLC, a firm run by former Trump administration officials, which has been paid by Mr. Trump, amazingly enough, by Mr. Trump's Political Action Committee. Okay. Somewhat less amazing, repeatedly engaged in theatrics throughout his testimony, displaying visible contempt for Democrats on the panel and personally attacking 2 Democratic members, Jamie Raskin and Daniel Goldman of New York, in his opening statement. He accused both, without any evidence, of lying about him and his testimony, and consistently talked back to Democratic members and filibustered rather than answering their questions. That'll help you a lot. Another Democrat on the panel, AOC, left the former U.S. Navy officer filibustering and attempting to shout over her while she pressed him repeatedly to say what, if any, crimes he was alleging President Biden to have committed. Asked several times by the New York Congresswoman, Bobulinski could not say with any specificity which laws he was accusing Mr. Biden of violating. Although Republican members repeatedly cited photos of alleged text messages and emails on an allegedly broken BlackBerry belonging to Mr. Bobulinski as evidence of President Biden's involvement in Hunter's businesses, the GOP voted down an explicit proposal from Mr. Raskin to subpoena the old mobile phone to determine whether the messages were genuine or fabrications. All right, pretty late in playing our outro music here, but I love it. Having failed with the broken laptop thing, they now go with the broken BlackBerry. All right, if broken BlackBerry has the evidence, let's subpoena it. No, thanks. They also defeated a voice vote on a separate motion to subpoena records from Jared Kushner, by the way, still in the news, Trump's former son-in-law, current son-in-law, and former White House senior advisor, who received $2 billion in investments in his new hedge fund from Saudi sovereign wealth funds after the Trump administration came to an end. That's a good inclusion there. I like when they give more context. The hearing was the latest in a series of shambolic public sessions, which House Republicans have used to further an investigation that has uncovered no evidence of wrongdoing by the president after more than a year of work under the GOP majority. We're getting towards the end here, but I don't know if we're going to make it all the way through. But just basically more evidence of the collapse of their efforts. As I mentioned, Kushner is still in the news. We didn't really read through his shambolic comments of his own on Gaza yesterday. It was just too much to contemplate. But having parsed through them a little bit, I guess there are some observations we might safely be able to make, perhaps tomorrow. But perhaps we'll be overtaken by events, or basketball fever, or an actual fever, for all we know. We'll see. We'll see what happens.
Radio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the morning with David Waldman.
But if you really want to see what's happening, stay tuned, why don't you, for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Let's get rid of that accent. And Justice Putnam will bring you his roundup of what's happening around the country and around the world, including Alina Habba back in the news. Her refusal to answer if Trump was going to accept money from Russia and Saudi Arabia to pay for that bond. That means he will.